Hello and welcome to Postwave. This is Eric,
I'm Trevor.
and today we're going to be talking about time. Is time an illusion?
How do we reconcile our experience of a single present moment being the only thing that's real with the fact that determinism seems to imply everything exists all at once?
When you watch a movie, is the movie what's projected onto the screen, or is it the real, with each individual frame lasting for eternity? What time is it?
Can we ever know?
Yes. All right, thanks for joining us. This has been Trevor and Eric podcast. Trevor and Eric talk about things podcast. Like, comment, subscribe. Thanks. Bye.
um. So, do you remember how your thinking about time has evolved as you've grown up? Because I find that really interesting to think about.
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't know that I was considering the question in any deep regard when I was younger, up until probably when I started listening to Neil deGrasse Tyson and Michio Kaku talking about all their cool stuff.
Yeah, that's cool. I honestly I don't remember thinking about it a whole lot, even though I read Cosmos by Carl Sagan, and my family and I watched all the movies and stuff. But I still don't think I started thinking about time in a really philosophical way until at least college. I don't know. I don't remember thinking about it at all during high school or.
Yeah, absolutely. There's just kind of that general anxiety about trying to get ahead and not fall behind and prepare for your future.
Yeah.
There wasn't really time to think about time in that mindset.
Yeah, and you just don't have any perspective because the only thing that's happened to you is kind of this one thing that's basically just living with your parents and seems pretty unchanging until it changes.
Yeah. And that's true even on a psychological, interpersonal level. I remember just sort of that I had this impression of my parents and my family as this entity, this landscape of my existence that was, as you were saying, unchanging. It's just a facet of what it is to be alive, is this particular energy. But it took me maybe a semester going through when I first got to college to even begin to address that that particular energy pattern is maybe not, definitely not universal, and maybe not even healthy for me to be around constantly.
That's interesting. Why do you think that is?
Why did it take me that long?
Yeah.
I would say it's because it's what I had experienced my whole life, and I had no experience of anything other than that.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, actually, I think one of the main places I thought about time first was when I started learning about spectralism in college. And spectralism, for anyone who doesn't know, is this movement within contemporary classical music that's based a lot on using alternate intonation systems and basing things on the harmonic series, but also playing with your perception of time over long long time scales and processes that unfold very slowly. Um,
Hmm.
and there's also really long duration music by people like Morton Feldman, that pieces that last 5 hours just for, instrumental group of like 3 or 4 players.
Mm-hmm. And minimalist.
Yeah, yeah. Um, I feel like that was the first place I started to really think about kind of the philosophical part of it. Just the fact that um, that our perception of time is so mysterious and so.
Hmm.
I mean, it's one of those things. It's like on the surface in our everyday experience, but to actually describe it is pretty difficult
Yeah.
to actually, yeah, describe what's happening.
Yeah, it's one of those things where it's so basic that the more basic it gets, the harder it is to address.
Yeah,
In the same way that, like in math, the more basic a thing is, the harder it is to prove. Like, how do you prove that you can have numbers that equal numbers?
right. Yeah, you have to have some things that are like axioms, right? That you take as a given.
Yeah, absolutely.
One of the people who got me thinking about time most recently is this guy Sean Carroll, who's this theoretical physicist at Caltech. So Sean Carroll believes in this view called eternalism, which is basically that all time exists at once, and that the idea that the present moment is privileged over the past or the future is just an illusion of our
Hmm.
human biology.
Wow. So that's
And
kind of contrary to the Taoist perspective of only the present is real and the past and future are illusory.
yeah, that's interesting. I was actually listening to something on Taoism earlier today. Don't they also believe in like cyclic things?
Hmm. Certainly.
Yeah.
Um, well, I would say a lot of the cultures in the belief system, if you can call it that, perhaps it's more of a philosophy.
Yeah, I mean, I think it goes back to like Plato and Aristotle. People have been trying to figure out the nature of time forever. Um, I think, yeah, I mean, with religion, it's kind of that if you imagine, we'll talk about this, the idea of a block universe that's
Mm.
that all exists at once, and is like a succession of moments. In a religious sense, God could be considered to be outside of that, viewing it from some kind of like 5 dimensional perspective. That's
Yeah.
I thought that was the coolest part that I feel like of that video,
Mm.
where he was talking about how you'd have to, in order to behave as if you were unstuck in time, you would actually have to, like, the time travel, you'd actually have to be traveling in some kind of fifth dimension that's
Yeah,
neither.
in
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
So that makes me think. So if you have this block universe where everything in the present and past and future all exist and are as tangible, yeah. So if you have this lattice work of three spatial dimensions and time is as tangible a dimension as the spatial dimensions that you can consider traversing in the same way that you traverse the spatial dimensions. So you could consider that while we are taking one of these dimensions and progressing steadily in one direction, even as we explore in the other three dimensions, that particular dimension of time could be traversed freely by a different entity whose cross section of space time is entirely at a different angle than ours. And for that entity, it would also have to have an experience of time, but that their dimension of time would not be the same dimension as our dimension of time, so that their dimension of time could perhaps be one of our spatial dimensions.
What do you mean by at a different angle?
So if you take, for example, a graph let's say a three-dimensional graph. You have x, y, and z, and let's say that we have some flatlanders, some two-dimensional beings who live in this
Oh,
three-dimensional world, and
right.
their z-axis is time, that they continually progress.
Mm-hmm.
Every single experience they have is one step further out along that z-axis.
Mm-hmm.
So that dimension becomes time. But you could also imagine there's a different group of flatlanders who cross-sect, and they actually have x as their time. They're continually progressing outward along x.
Yeah, because so it's kind of like space and time would switch places somehow.
Well, specifically, a single spatial dimension and time.
Hmm. Is that a Mikio Kaku thing or?
I think he talks about ideas in this vein, and a lot of my own ideas on this subject are highly derivative from Michio Kaku, Neil deGrasse Tyson, and actually Alan Watts. I would say
Yeah.
are my primary influences, and they have a lot of incredible ideas. And if I embrace some of their ideas, it's because they ring so true to me. So I don't necessarily know if some of these ideas that I'm sharing are entirely original, but they are fully embraced, I'll say.
Yeah, so the guy who Sean Carroll kind of takes his cues from on this topic of time is his name is J.M.E. McTaggart, and he was active around the turn of the century, like early 1900s. So he comes from this whole tradition of analytic philosophy that tries to take a really rigorous look at the world through rules and logical systems, and tries not to rely too much on intuition. So the way he approached this problem of time is that he can see two possibilities for how reality is, right? So in possibility A, which he called the A series of time, there's the past, present, and future, just like we think about it, right? Those are three separate things, and the
Hmm.
present is the most real, and the past and the future are not real. We have memories from the past, but not the future, right? Those three things are different. And there's another possibility, which is the B time series, which is only delineated by earlier events and later events. So there's no rigid division between these three past, present, future categories. And he chose in this paper called The Unreality of Time, the A version of time is actually self contradictory because events keep changing which category they're in.
Could you explain that a little more?
Yeah, let me find the quotation. Okay. It would, I suppose, be universally admitted that time involves change. A particular thing, indeed, may exist unchanged throughout any amount of time. But when we ask what we mean by saying that there were different moments of time, or a certain duration of time through which the thing was the same, we find that we mean that it remained the same while other things were changing. A universe in which nothing whatever changed, including the thoughts of the conscious beings in it, would be a timeless universe. So the way I think about it, A series is like there's three clear delineations, right? That there's things that are clearly in the past, things that are clearly in the present, things that are clearly in the future.
Hmm.
And those categories are obviously always changing because we're moving through time, right? Um,
Sure.
but they're rigid boundaries, right? Um,
Hmm.
and the B series is more like a gradient, like it's a continuous flow, and there's the only thing that connects the moments to each other is just that they're adjacent, basically.
Hmm. Is this getting into the Zeno dividing space an infinite number of times?
Maybe, although I think we're still not sure whether time is indivisible.
What do you think?
Um, I would guess that it probably has some tiniest unit, just because that would seem to fit with the rest of the universe.
How so? Tell me about your experience with time and your understanding of it on an intuitive level. Like, what does it feel like to you?
Yeah. So I've had experiences where I felt like the individual moments of time passing, and I think actually, so there was some pharmacological assistance there. um, but my theory is that it has something to do with your heartbeat and the way blood flows in your brain, and that you're feeling this tiny little increase in blood flow in your brain every time your heart beats, and that
Hmm.
creates part of the sense that there is like a now, or there's a perceptual now. Um, I mean,
Interesting.
it's also just directly tied to perception, because it's hard to imagine what perception would be like if it wasn't tied to a present moment.
Hmm. Yeah. So you're saying that you've had an experience of time seeming as though it comes in discrete packets that say start in one present moment and you find yourself in another present moment
Hmm.
later on,
Yeah.
and that you're postulating that it's the physical mechanism of your body that is creating that ticking, as it were.
Hmm.
And it's interesting that you brought up the heart, which could definitely be a clock. In Sean Carroll's video, he talks about how Galileo was looking up at the pendulum of in the church and trying to time it to his own heartbeat as a clock.
Hmm.
Another clock, of course, to consider would be the nervous system, which does have its own rate that it pulses at.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think if there's anything like a single unit of time, that it's nothing like the one that we perceive, because
Mm.
it must be, if there is a smallest unit of time, it must be in the order of, you know, billionths of a second or something.
Yeah, we're too clumsy machines to be able
Yeah.
to. Hmm.
It is really interesting. I guess I've just started to pay more attention to this recently, especially when I'm teaching and like something's not going quite right, how time just all of a sudden like slows down and it seems like forever. Like I had a first lesson with a new student the other day who like I had never met in person, and it was my first lesson like that for the school. And
Hmm.
like 5 minutes in, like they're like, "Oh, I can't hear anything from you anymore." But and I went back and looked at the chat because I was messaging them like, "Okay, like I'll I'll restart Zoom if it doesn't get fixed." And it was literally just like a minute of not being able to hear each other, but it was
Hmm.
like, "Oh my god, this is literally forever."
Yeah, I felt the same way one time at the composer jury at the end
Yeah.
of the semester. All the composing teachers sit around and listen to our music. And I, being the fuckhead that I was, forgot my thumb drive that had my all my
Hmm.
music on it that I was supposed to be playing for them. And so I come in and go to the computer that's right there in front of them all. Go to my SoundCloud, type in my username, type in my password, and I'm like sweating. Like time is passing, time is passing. Dan Kellogg goes, this is it. This is the thing. Like I'm like, yeah, I know. I'm sorry. Couldn't have been more
Yeah.
than 30 seconds.
Yeah. Waiting for technology. Always do that.
Geez, how much time have we spent in our lives just waiting for technology to work?
Long ass time.
Long ass time.
You don't want too much ass time, but little ass time now and then. So I this is interesting because I'm someone who uh am chronically unsure about things. And recently, for some reason, I think this started like about a month ago, but I suddenly had this really strong like visceral intuition that all time does exist at once because or not that all time uh exists at once, but that the implication of that would be, if that were true, that consciousness is eternal. Because
Hmm.
if we imagine that our past selves always exist, right, eternally, what does that mean for them to be conscious? And
Hmm. Yeah.
the only thing I can really imagine coming out of that is that we're continually living the same thing over and over again in a loop.
Yeah, that's fascinating. We've touched on this before. Um, the only way that I differ in my understanding from yours is that language of over and over again in a loop, because that implies a passage of time, a circular passage of time, in fact. Whereas my understanding of eternity is, by definition, it is that which is not experienced over the passage of time. It is timeless. It is what happens in that instant and not over the course of several instances.
Hmm. Yeah, I'm. It's hard to tell whether it's just like a semantic thing or not, because
It
what
may
do
well
you
be.
you're kind of implying that there's something outside of time that is unchanging, like there's this fixed background on it, right? Um that time is changing against or something. Um that kind of does imply that the loop thing that I was
Hmm.
talking about, which I agree isn't quite accurate.
I'll say that the general gist of your idea is, I think, spot on and speaks to something true. It's just a matter of the language that I
Mm-hmm.
differ on.
Do you find that idea distressing at all, or like how do you?
No, actually, I find the idea of an eternal existence in a present moment in our past existing eternally, I find that so calming and
Yeah,
relaxing
yeah, I do too. Although I mean
because it's
it does kind of, I mean, if you started thinking along the lines of like suffering and stuff, it is kind of uh if you think about all the lives
mm,
that are just short and brutal and just on like a loop, I mean that's kind of distressing. Um
yeah, it's literally
yeah.
hell.
Um
Hell exists right
yeah.
here and now. And all even all of the aspects of our own existences where we experience suffering in whatever form that occurs, that suffering experienced is eternal. It's there all
Right.
the time. Well, all the language. But for me, that's okay because it's at the same time implies that there is always existence, which implies that there always will be existence.
Yeah.
So all of the scrambling and striving and growing and trying to make it work, you don't have to hang
Hmm.
on to it because it's still going to be there after
Yeah.
you stop trying.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean the part of it that makes me feel like the most warm and fuzzy inside is like, you're always with your family, you're always like a kid with your family, like
What if your family sucks?
still true. But it doesn't have to be
Hmm.
that kind of thing, but just, past memories that you're sad that it's
Hmm.
not like that way anymore, you know,
Oh,
like
wow. You're always innocent as a child.
yeah, yeah, I mean all the, like your middle school friends you haven't seen in like years and years and years, you're all are still like hanging out. Whatever.
That one really awkward thing that happened to you in middle school, where it felt like eternity in that moment. It is eternity. It's still happening.
Yeah, the thing is you have to be careful to not let that make it easier for you to torture yourself with past events that you wish happened a different way. But it's like I just have to see it as kind of comical, because literally if you think about the like most little mistakes you're making to the biggest ones, like you're making the exact same one every time. Like yeah.
Yeah, something about the scale of it, something about having that perspective lends it a comical air, because it puts the smallness into perspective. And I think that extends to suffering too.
How's that?
That when you have that perspective, as if looking back on it from an outside experience, even knowing that it's happening eternally, it's somehow smaller, because you know it's only one small instance amid a sea of instances, and they're not all suffering.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, we'll talk about this, I think, on a later episode, but yeah, how you do the math of suffering versus pleasurable experiences is really, really complicated. And I think you have to, at some point, you have to give some very, very large value to just existing at all, because that's kind of the precondition for anything else to happen.
Yeah. Absolutely, I agree 100%. And this will get into a topic we talk about on a later episode, where we get into the anti-natalist views and tear them a new one. Because at a certain point, the existence of suffering it doesn't matter if the existence is what's important.
You said that the existence is important, not the suffering?
Exactly, yeah. And even that existence, even if it comes at the price of having that suffering, it's still worth it.
Yeah, I mean, to a point.
Yeah, I think that's the discussion for the other week right there. I have a quote I'd like to bring up. So are you familiar with Laplace's demon?
Yes, although remind me.
Sure. So this is the idea of Laplace's demon by Marquis Pierre Simon de Laplace. We may regard the present state of the universe as the effect of its past and the cause of its future. An intellect which at any given moment knew all of the forces that animate nature and the mutual positions of beings that compose it. If this intellect were vast enough to submit the data to analysis, could condense into a single formula the movement of the greatest bodies of the universe and that of the lightest atom. For such an intellect, nothing could be uncertain, and the future, just like the past, would be present before its eyes.
Yeah. What year was that written?
1814.
It's interesting. So that kind of implies that everything is completely deterministic, right? That you could actually, if you could know everything about every particle, including its speed and position, then you could predict everything. But we know from the uncertainty principle that you can't actually do that perfectly, right?
Sure, but so that's something that's so remarkable about this language, though, is the way that this ends. It actually kind of sidesteps or precludes that idea, because it doesn't make any claims about predicting the future. It does, but then it says that that future prediction, once you know it, once you can see it as true, that is by definition seeing it as present. And so anything that you know for certain is that is what it is. That's the present. That's what the present is.
I think that's poetic, but I don't think it's true.
Why?
Because, I mean, you could know that you're going to get a birthday cake in a week. Does that make the birthday cake real?
No, you couldn't. You can't know that. You may predict it, and you may have good chances of getting that prediction right, but you can never know it with absolute certainty.
Right. So then you can't ever bring anything into the present like that, actually. Like you can't know enough about something in the future ever to bring it into the present.
What this says to me though is it's not a single passage through time. There's two cross sections of space-time here happening where the time dimension is different from one to the other. The one is internal within the universe posited, but after that point, all of that internal past, present, and future becomes a present within the context of some other greater universe.
Huh. How exactly does that happen?
Because can you be sure of anything that is not in the present?
Yeah, I mean, if you have pictures of, past
No, that's again probability. Like you have these historical objects that infer certain things, but you're just interpreting imperfect data. At a certain point, there's going to be too much noise, or you're just going to get the wrong idea, or maybe there's things that were happening outside the picture that you didn't know about that relate to the scene.
Yeah, and it's always there's always the possibility that all of it was created just 5 seconds ago and with all your memories already there and all that stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, how do you know it really is or was?
Yeah.
That's the thing. Is the question.
Mm-hmm. I still think it's possible that the indeterminate nature of quantum mechanics could mean that something way more mysterious is going on, where nothing is actually like linear or determinate, and like we're in some kind of random generation machine that's like there's no one continuous stream of events. There's just like something else happening. Does that make any sense? Like like somehow there's not like one linear narrative. It's not like it's not like splitting branches so much as like all the frames are just kind of in a jumble, and
that it sort of automatically sorts itself so that the things that are most similar are adjacent, and that creates the illusion of continuity.
Yeah, something like that.
Wow. Yeah, I think that's got to be a really valid way to look at it.
Yeah, I that could still be compatible with either eternalism or presentism, but it's hard to know how.
Mm-hmm. It makes me think about Rick and Morty and Rick's portal gun, where he goes to the alternate universes, and there's so they have all these different universes, and they're different in different ways, and like there's of course the episode where they go to the Citadel of Ricks, and there's like millions of different Ricks and Mortys all living together, and they're all slightly different, and there's like a lot of them that are pretty darn similar. They just have like different haircuts maybe, or maybe they don't. And then there's the outliers. You've got like 20 normal Mortys, and then you've got the one lizard Morty who's just like a
Mm-hmm.
lizard person. And then there's like the one where he's like a hammer walking around. And there's like some sort of continuity going, right? Like there's a lot of similarity between most of these parallel universes. And then there's certain arbitrary ways in which they're similar and weird, unexpected ways in which they differ. And like
Mm-hmm.
what makes those part of the same continuum of universes as the one that the original Rick is from.
So I mean, I think it kind of comes from the idea that if the universe is actually infinite, that every possible combination of atoms will happen an infinite number of times.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So that you get literally every minute variation repeated an infinite number of times down to, the color of someone's shirt or even like the number of threads in their shirt
Yeah.
being a little different. Which is mind-boggling and seems kind of counterintuitive, but just because our brains didn't evolve to think that way doesn't mean it's true.
And what's that organizing principle that says this is more similar than another?
I mean, if you break it down to just like molecular composition, I don't know.
So this idea that you just posited about how things just randomly happen and that there's no order to it, and then eventually things that are similar enough happen, and so that creates the sense of continuity. Isn't that the same idea as the sum over paths idea, which posits that a subatomic particle, when traveling from one point to another, takes the most direct course, but the way it finds the most direct course is that it takes literally every possible course to get there, and that the averaging of all of those courses is the most direct course.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, does that have to do with virtual particles, or is that a different?
I don't know, but
thing?
so what I'm seeing, the connection here I'm seeing is that the first point that the particle is at, that's like the one reality. That's the one key frame of your existence where things make sense and it's organized. And then you have every possible random thing that happens until you have an occurrence that is so similar in every regard, except the only difference is that that particle has moved one unit or whatever to the side.
I think I'm still trying to wrap my head around it.
Me too. I feel slightly
yeah.
dizzy, actually. I actually feel really dizzy. And I think it's entirely due to that. Whoa.
Say it one more time.
I need to get some water.
Okay.
That was actually an incredibly unusual biological experience I just had.
Yeah.
Where that idea literally made my head spin.
Yeah. Yeah, so sometimes when I have a good idea, I feel like my heart like almost skips a beat or something. It's weird.
Hmm. Wow. Okay. Um, so then we were talking about how you can have an experience of a present experience of just this is your life, this is the moment right now,
Hmm.
and then you have a random occurrence of experiences that completely do not relate or may not relate in any way to that experience, just random things happening for forever until you have just by chance something that is incredibly similar to the initial experience that you started with, except for that it's changed one increment in that dimension that we're calling time.
Yeah.
Now, isn't that the same as the sum over paths theorem, where you have a single particle that exists in a certain point, and then for that particle to travel from one point to the next point over, it takes every possible path to get there. That particle simultaneously travels in every possible rambling path that will eventually lead to its destination. And if you average all of those paths, the result is that straight line between the two.
Hmm. Yeah. Okay. So you're saying that we're kind of we live like a moment in one life, and then a bunch of randomness happens that's shifting to other experiences and other like perspectives, and then suddenly we're randomly at the next time step in that timeline, and so it feels like we're just progressing that way, but it's actually like everything simultaneously just like bouncing around, and the only thing that's being perceived is the connection from when there's a pair of similar uh,
Mm-hmm.
states of the universe.
Yeah, yeah, and perhaps also tied to that is that the the ones that there is a perception of are the ones in which there is a consciousness to have a perception. So that all
Hmm.
those noisy paths that it takes from uh, random generated occurrences that happen between those 2 points, that they're not a consciousness in the fullest sense of the word. Like those existences do not support a consciousness.
Sorry, which existences?
The random occurrences that happen between each increment of our experience.
I mean, I don't know. I mean, I don't know about that. I mean, it kind of makes me think of like a panpsychist thing where like everything is actually the same consciousness. It's
Hmm.
just flitting back and forth between different
Oh
manifestations.
wow! Like
Like it's
yeah.
it's it's all the same. It's like a this really jagged like timeline that's it's skipping between
Hmm.
a billions of different perspectives at a time, but it's all like a single thread.
So you're saying it's like a radio signal, for example, where you're tuned into one particular frequency, but you have all of the noise of all of the frequencies happening at the same time, and the only reason that that one experience is the one that you're having is because that's the one you're tuned to.
Yeah, yeah.
Which is an idea that I stole shamelessly from Michio Kaku.
Oh yeah. I thought that was gonna be Alan Watts.
No.
I guess one thing we haven't really talked about is, I mean, one of the main things that makes time seem really important and the passage of time seem important is the second law of thermodynamics, right? which is the idea that entropy will always increase
Mm.
within a closed system. Um, and as far as we can tell in this universe, with the laws of physics that we have, it only goes that one direction, and you can't put the egg back in the shell and have it all perfectly come back together again. Um, and there's some processes that it can only go one way, and that seems to be one of the most concrete things that creates the sense of time, um, or it creates the sense of the passage of time
Hmm.
in the universe.
That there's a progression towards a certain state.
Yeah,
Hmm.
and I mean, humans are part of that. I read somewhere a while ago that human life, or life in general, is actually like really really efficient at increasing entropy, right? I mean, we just, we consume chemical energy and give off heat.
Yeah.
It's like all we do.
Hmm.
And so yeah, we're pretty inseparable from that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think to exist in uh, any sense of having agency,
Hmm.
you have to counteract that framework on which you're living. If the landscape that you're living on is that of death, right? The inevitable decay, then in order to be a living thing, you have to contradict that energy.
Yeah, yeah. You have to hold off against entropy increasing for the entirety of your life, basically.
Absolutely. And
Yeah,
the longer you go, the harder the struggle is, right?
yeah.
Yeah. The trick is to breathe.
I mean, that is one of the other things that comes to mind, um, when you think about life and the nature of suffering and that kind of thing. Because literally, it is, you have to keep expending effort as much as you can to avoid the universe just kind of, dismembering you and making you continuous with it.
Yeah.
Doesn't I mean that doesn't necessarily have to be a bad thing though, and that doesn't necessarily invoke pain or suffering, I guess.
It invokes struggle, though.
Yeah.
Is pain a necessary part of struggle?
That's a good question. I mean, I don't think so, because struggle is just, you have a goal and it's really hard to achieve,
Yeah, there's
and
contradictory forces, right?
yeah.
Yeah, so maybe if you approach that achieving that goal against the contradictory force in the most efficient way, then maybe that's painless.
Yeah, I mean, I would say pain has to have something to do with the nervous system.
Hmm. Or we could even take it to the ideological metaphor, where pain is the awareness of things that are not right, that could be fixed, or things to avoid.
Yeah, I don't know which one is more real. Oh, this is something I was wanting to maybe talk about. Have you heard of quantum immortality?
No.
Okay, so this is I mean, it's kind of like a fringe thing that's not super widely accepted, but it's the idea that it's impossible to die because your consciousness will always follow the the split in the multiverse where you keep existing.
Hmm. Yes. I've thought about this.
Yeah.
I can't disprove it.
I mean, the kind of the answer to it comes from the second law of thermodynamics, because at a certain point, that I mean, the universe is going to go through heat death, and all timelines will end in that, if not sooner, right? I mean, there are certain situations where no matter what happens, quantum mechanically, you're screwed because your star went supernova, or you know
Mm-hmm.
something. But it seems like it would at least apply to some things.
Definitely to some things, probably to most things, but I don't know if it's to all things. Michio Kaku, in his book Hyperspace, talks about how it's conceivably possible that a race could transcend the boundaries of our universe and populate into another universe, or at least induce some sort of effect from our universe outward. And
Mm-hmm.
in so doing, like, certainly we couldn't send all of us through, right? Most of us would die. Maybe we couldn't send anyone through, but we could send a seed of some sort to spawn, to shape the world, that some other new forming world in the way that seems desirable to us for some reason.
Mm-hmm.
And in so doing, like, you could have an infinite chain of those where there is a one line maybe that goes throughout existence eternally, over time, forever, without dying.
Wow.
And I think the nature of that experience is defined by the fact that it is forced to change continuously. It must change and adapt to survive, and if it doesn't, then it will die.
Hmm. Sorry, wait, how's this connected to the us uh influencing other universes and that whole thing?
Okay, so if you have a super advanced race that figures out how to send out some influence from its own universe into another, in order to pass that barrier, that is, it requires change. It requires a loss of what it was in order to
Mm-hmm.
progress onto what it will be.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, so even if you have this chain of one community of entities transcending one universe into another one, or imparting some influence from one to the other, and even if you have an infinite chain of those, the nature of that is that of a changing entity.
That's interesting. By entity, are you implying that it's some sort of continued consciousness, or?
Yeah. So I guess I'm playing pretty fast and loose with entity and entities. Well, okay. So let's say, for example, you have uh, a community of meat blobs like ourselves who manage to send an Adam and an Eve through a wormhole or something
Mm-hmm.
into another universe, and they repopulate
Mm-hmm.
this new universe. And
Mm-hmm.
as that new universe is approaching heat death, they escape out to another universe. Not the same two individuals. It would
Mm-hmm.
have to be an entirely different entity by that point, because
Mm-hmm.
the beings have evolved over all that time within this new context of this new universe.
Mm-hmm.
So they're going to adapt to their current environment. They're going to have different ideals, and the influence that they impart upon the next universe is going to be different than the
Yeah.
one before it. He does postulate some possible ways that that could actually happen. I do not pretend to understand them.
Okay. Yeah. So there's a cold spot in the cosmic microwave background that
Mm.
can't really be explained by stuff like density of stars. Oh, okay. So some people say it's an optical illusion produced by a lack of intervening galaxies. I think it's something like
Mm.
it would have transferred some energy to the other universe, and so that's why it would be colder. Something like that.
Hmm. Okay. Yeah, and it makes me think about if you have ever blown a bunch of bubbles and you see the bubbles, not in the air, but like if you have something that's creating a pile of bubbles, and they're all touching each other and pushing against each other, and they're all deforming each other by proximity.
Yeah, it's interesting because I don't know what the
Hmm.
evidence would be for like that stuff happening all the time, but it's totally possible.
Well, isn't that the nature of, if you were to say that your existence within a universe is like the lifespan
Mm-hmm.
of the bubble, right? And the passage of time is the whole time that bubble exists. It's kind of like there's un, forces that we can't explain, like the force that caused rapid inflation in the early stages of the expansion of our universe. Perhaps that force could be the fluctuations of other universes pressing against our own.
Yeah. I mean, it could explain a lot of things potentially about how the universe started and why it had the initial properties. It did actually. This connects to someone who has a different view than eternalism. Lee Smolin, who's another contemporary theoretical physicist. Um, but he has this idea that kind of invokes natural selection, and uh,
Hmm.
his theory is that there's something that's producing universes with essentially random uh, constants, physical constants, and different laws of physics, and then
Hmm.
those propagate based on. Um, I think he actually said, if I'm remembering this right, it has something to do with black holes, the generation of black holes, and that it's actually, I think part of the theory is that black holes create new universes when they form.
Hmm.
But it gets to the anthropological principle, right? Which is, you can ask the question, why are the laws of physics the way they are, and you can answer that with, because we're here observing them, and there would be other laws of physics that wouldn't allow for beings to observe that universe. Therefore, we're not in that universe. We're in this one. Um, and that would make sense if what was
Hmm.
happening was that essentially every possible universe with every possible set of physics was getting generated, and we're showing up in the small percentage that can support life.
Hmm. Yeah.
It's interesting,
Hmm.
like, yeah,
It's
like how many of
incredible.
these different ideas like could be true or not, and like which ones are true, like of the set of like the metaphysical way reality works. Like there are so many different.
Hmm. And then what does it mean to be true? Like, you can have ideas that seem to contradict each other, but each reveal some aspect of the truth. And when you transcend into a higher dimensionality of understanding that concept, you finally find out how those ideas integrate, while on the lower level seeming to contradict.
Yeah, that's well put. Yeah.
Gee, thanks.
Yeah, we can never have perfect knowledge of the universe as far as we know. I mean, we'll see what happens if we get strong AI
Hmm.
at some point, if that results in anything like perfect knowledge.
My sense on the question of AI is that it's going to approach perfect knowledge in ways that we can't even comprehend. But I feel like there's some sort of constant that's got to say that it'll never fully reach it.
Yeah, I mean, I guess we'll find out. I mean, if there's some fundamental limit to like what you can compute within the given within the universe, right? Because I mean, there are some problems that, even if you turned every available, Planck length of universe into like circuitry, you still couldn't compute the whole thing.
Yeah.
So it depends.
So this is an entry from my journal from college.
If the universe is shaped like a hypersphere, looping back on itself, then that is a finite reality. Imagine traveling instantaneously in one direction. Eventually, you'll wind up back where you started. This is a world that can be known in its entirety, so that it cannot be an expression of everything, as its deterministic state squelches out the possibility of free will. That's some strange language I put there, but we'll talk on that. If, however, the universe stretches out continuously in all directions, always producing new content, then there is no point at which it can be said to be looped, no distance at which the hypersphere's diameter can be set. There will just be continuously new landscapes, stretching out forever. As this universe extends infinitely in all directions, it follows that a traveler will eventually reach parallel worlds, even an observable universe that is identical to the one they began in. It will even at times repeat itself, at a number of repetitions approaching infinity. But eventually, it will always move on, expansing new and original territory. So then, an infinite loop of expression is a finite quantity, and a finite loop is an expression of infinity.
Pretty deep, bro.
That's what she said. The whole thing, including the bra.
Why? So, what's the significance of the hypersphere as far as explaining things?
So, the hypersphere is a way to describe a universe that is looped. Because, say, for example, you exit one side of the screen, like in Pac-Man, you come in on the other side, right? That's what the hypersphere is. If you go around a ball in one direction, eventually you'll get back to where you started.
Right. So has your thinking changed that much since you wrote that, or sounds like it's kind of different from a little different from what we were talking about before, but
so I actually feel that I don't disagree with anything in this, although I've been thinking along different lines lately. The language I use where I talk about free will almost as if it's a constant, right? That it's like a necessity that proves that that's real. That, I mean, I still feel like that's probably true. Well, I think that's a whole entire another discussion that we can have.
Yeah, I think it's a beautiful idea how the infinite and the finite kind of end up being the same thing if they're, we think about in the right way.
Just looking across the other side of the divide, I get really crazy with going on this. There's another entry a little bit later. I'll share it now, although I don't know if it'll make any sense whatsoever. So it's titled, Why a Cosmic Speed Limit, the speed of light, is an elegant way to ensure the fundamental freshness or free will of a universe, and allows for the universe to be shaped as a hypersphere of infinite radius, a shape which greatly increases the efficiency of information storage, and which at radii less than the observable universe has the effect of shaping the universe iteratively, with each successive iteration derived from a previous moment in a point's history. In a hyperspheric universe, Any object moving at a finite speed in a straight line will eventually arrive at the same place it started, but at a future moment in time. In effect, this path is an extra-dimensional spiral, where the object circles back on itself only offset in one dimension. If the observable universe is greater in diameter than the diameter of the hypersphere, then it is possible to see multiple instances of the same point in space, but in different places in time, simultaneously. This can be seen as a recursive pattern where each successive event is derived from the last. If the speed of movement is constant, then the iterations will be regularly spaced. The greater the field of vision is in relation to the diameter of the hypersphere, the more iterations will be visible. Indeed, the more universes will appear iterative. So, by imposing a speed limit, each new moment in the straight path of an object is a unique, unexplored world state. In order to maintain free will, the field of vision must be less than twice the diameter of the hypersphere. I don't know how I worked that out.
Isn't the diameter of the hypersphere infinite, though? I think that's what you said.
Is it? I think the point of the diameter is that it's a finite number.
Okay, maybe I got something mixed up.
So you have two spheres, right? You've got, well, the hypersphere of the universe, and then you've got the sphere of your observable universe. And you could imagine a world that exists within a hypersphere where the diameter of the hypersphere is less than that of your observable universe.
Mm-hmm.
So you can actually look back and within one field of vision, you can see the same point reflected in multiple places, but it's not a reflection. It's that's
Yeah,
what it is.
I see what you're meaning. Yeah, I mean, if the universe is infinite, you could see your own past somewhere happening over there. Is that kind of what you're saying? Although,
Exactly. Yeah.
the speed of light, maybe this is what you're saying, and I'm just not missing it. The speed of light would prohibit you from seeing that ever because it's so far away. Like you couldn't actually observe it at the same time.
Mm-hmm. That's true of our universe, but if you were to imagine this universe where it's less than the speed of light. Yeah, because if there's a speed of light, then you can't have instantaneous travel
or information traveling instantaneously.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There was a footnote after I talk about a shape which greatly increases the efficiency of information storage and which at radii less than the observable universe, asterisk, has the effect of shaping the universe iteratively. Asterisk goes to...
The Planck length is such a radius where r is much smaller than the observable universe. The iterations displayed in these miniature hyperspheres is the presence of strings or membranes or resonant bodies, however you want to talk about superstring theory, the variation appearing as their presence and absence.
I'd have to think about that one. I forget what I meant.
Oh, there's some interesting stuff in there for sure. So you think string theory is correct, or part of it is correct?
Yeah. And then here's an entirely. I'm sure that anyone who knows anything about it will laugh at me when I say this. So Michio Kaku in his book talks about how first there's string theory, where they postulate these little tiny strings resonating, and that each resonance represents a subatomic particle, and there's different ways they can interact. But then they were extending the theory and branching it out into M theory, which is basically string theory Mark II, where the prominent difference is that instead of strings, they're actually membranes, like the surface of a drum that can resonate. And then I was thinking, well, isn't the obvious next step, since we're just stepping up in numbers of dimensions, is resonant bodies, right?
Yeah, I mean, you could ask what it means for something that small to be three-dimensional. I mean, I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's one issue I've had with string theory, is that it postulates a size for these strings. I don't know if that makes any sense or if it's necessary, that maybe these strings don't exist in the same continuum of space, and so that the idea of size doesn't really make sense.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I mean, I feel like when you're talking about stuff that's this, and whenever we're taught this in science class, it's always like, this is how atoms work. Actually, we were lying to you. This is how they actually work. Oh, actually, we're still lying to you. This is how they actually work.
At the bottom of the chain is,
yeah,
we have no fucking idea.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't think I really know enough about string theory to comment on it. But I think the main criticism of it has always been that it doesn't really lead to claims that you can refute or like test. But I think that might be changing.
It's like how Sean Curl in the video you sent me talks about how philosophy and science have this sort of competitive, uneasy truce where they can work together sometimes, and that maybe this is a field where there's actually something valuable to be gained by looking from the philosophical perspective.
Totally, yeah. And actually, I mean, I think most fields actually do require some sort of philosophy if you're going to examine them as closely as possible. I mean, even science, like, we don't, how do we know that the scientific method shows us anything that's actually true?
Yeah.
It's interesting because for a long time, physicists didn't really talk about the metaphysical implications of quantum mechanics. But nowadays people are, I think, taking it more seriously, and it's exciting that people are actually like talking about about philosophical concepts like this, and that they're relevant to like our understanding of physics and the way the universe works.
Yeah. The melding of the halves, the joining of the bodies. Of knowledge, that is.